Scale, exit, repeat. This is a show that we do every Friday at 2 o'clock Eastern. If you're listening to it in replay, you might not know, but it is a live show. We have a live audience interaction. We really enjoy it when you come to the show and come on stage and interact. We talk a lot about different topics and different issues. And today we're talking about selling your business. And if you've ever sold a business before or have thought about selling your startup, this is the show to listen to because you're going to get some very interesting advice. Hello, Mimi. How are you doing? We're pretty excited about today's show.
Yes, me too. I'm good. How are you?
Oh, very good. And you might not know this also, but Mimi is the one who runs the website startup.club. And on that website, there are a lot of articles that have come out, a lot of podcasts. We have an AI called Startup Club AI, where you can go there and ask it a question. We've hired two individuals uh, who are studying AI. One of them is actually my daughter, and another individual who is studying analytics. And we're creating an AI engine where you'll be able to ask Startup Club a question about your startup, and it's going to come back with relevant answers from the book, Start, Scale, Exit, Repeat, and also relevant answers from the videos that we've done and all the shows and podcasts and from all the people who have given us advice on particular topics. You'll be able to tap into that without actually having to go through the process of reading the book. Although I have to say, woke up this morning, checked it out on Amazon. We were number one in America for entrepreneurship management on Amazon. That was very cool. We've been number one now several times since the launch of the book on October 3rd. And we're just really excited about that because, you put a lot of work into something and you don't often see the results. And today's topic is all about selling your business and having successful exits. You can put 10 years in your life and screw it up on the exit. Trust me, I've been there, done that myself. Michelle, what do you think about today's topic? All about the selling your company.
I mean, I love this, right? It takes so long and we're literally working so hard to get to that point. But gosh, when it happens and things are going right and you find the right partners, there's nothing like it, Colin. And it really, for those that have read the book Start, Scale, Exit, Repeat, it's absolutely critical to master the skill and do the whole setup and the planning, because that's what helps us grow wealth. We're not necessarily trying to build a unicorn, which, if you read the first chapter, you'll see what I'm talking about. But it's the way of how we scale up our wealth by, continuing to start, scale, exit, repeat.
And it is. And you've been recently involved in an exit, working. Oh, we lost her there. I don't know what happened there. She joined as a listener. Let's get her back in the audience. Did somebody drop her to the audience? Was that you,
Not
Mimi?
me.
It was not
No.
you. You know what? We're still living with the bugs. We're still living with the bugs. It's great to have Samir jump on stage, and we're going to invite you on stage to talk about your exit and to talk about, you know, the, the did it go well or did it sort of fall apart? Recently, Michelle and I ran a company. She was president, I was the owner, and there she is. She's back. And we sold it to GoDaddy Registry after 9 years. It was .club and alternative.com, .net, .org. Michelle, can you just sort of like talk a little bit about that exit, the process, why you think we did so well on the sale of that company?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. It ended up being our best partner, which was GoDaddy. So, for me, it really reiterates the importance of the partners and the relationships that you build. Like, we knew all along it was a very strategic relationship. And much to the dismay and whatnot of many people, naysayers of, even board members. I'm going to say that, and investors. We spent a lot of time nurturing that relationship because we did see the potential there. We did see the synergies. So for me, what I really, learned, it's so important, when you're doing business with any partner, you just don't know what will happen. It's just like treat every one of them seriously and really think about what the implications are. They were a strategic partner, okay? And we spent a lot of time, visiting and going to conferences. The accounting team would go bananas, and Colin can tell you this. Oh my God, why are you spending so much money? But we saw that we had the vision and we knew how strategic they were. And to that means we were very candid with them throughout the process and before the process that we thought that they were the perfect partner and that we could eventually do a strategic alliance. So like don't shy away from these things is what I think, Colin. Like a lot of people go at these kind of negotiations. We were doing marketing programs, by the way, with them and placement, etc. They were a number one distribution partner. But you know, a lot of people go at those types of negotiations where there's, I'm winning and you're losing or vice versa. But really, not to be cliche, but it is a win-win. There's nothing like a great partnership to really like move the dial forward, even if it's not them acquiring you, but to make the business grow. Colin.
Yeah, that's what today's show is about. Um, it's all about how do we do the exit? How do we make it right? Um, what's special about today's episode is that we're also using this episode as the basis for an article that's coming out on Forbes. So, Mimi, if you're able to put up the most recent article. Yep, we're Clubhouse, and in Clubhouse we sometimes have these little anomalies like phone calls that come in and hit our phone. But Mimi, if you're able to post the last article that we recently did on Forbes, it was really, really interesting. It was based on last week's episode, which you can catch in podcast. Search your favorite podcast network, Start, Scale, Exit, Repeat, Serial Entrepreneur Secrets Revealed. And we were interviewed by Pi.ai, and she did an interesting job. I would say she did a phenomenal job, but also there were a lot of questions she asked as a moderator that we would not have expected. And you'll find that was quite entertaining. And it became the topic of an article for Forbes that we published last week. So today we're going to publish we're going to work on this topic of exit. You know, I spent 10 years writing this book, Start, Scale, Exit, Repeat. And really, the genesis of this book came to me based on my career in the 20s. I had started a business with my brother called Internet Direct. It became the fastest growing company in Canada, the number one fastest growing company in Canada. In fact, they had us on the front page of magazines, sort of like Inc. magazine. It was called Profit Magazine. If we have any Canadian listeners up there, and we took the company public. And in 1999, we decided to sell the company to a cable company called Look Communications. But we agreed to an 18-month lockup. See, things were going like crazy in 1999. Nothing could go wrong. But come March of 2020, they decide to break Microsoft up, and the NASDAQ falls 1,000 points. We pull a $50 million offering, the company at the time. And understand, at this point, I had given up CEO-ship, or I was not running the company. My brother was not running the company. And we were actually, I was still the vice president of the internet division and buying a lot of companies at the time, but we were not in control of the company. Yet we had signed up to an 18-month lockup. We had agreed that we wouldn't sell our shares 18 months after the merger of our two companies. And again, things were very, very frothy in 1999. In any case, fast forward a little bit here. The Nasdaq falls from 5,000 to 4,000, and we pull our $50 million offering. Fast forward 18 months later, the company files for bankruptcy protection. And the stock, which by the way traded over $1 billion, $1.2 billion, $1.3 billion, and I owned 13% of that at 28 years old. That stock I traded at $19, came down, and I sold it for 6 cents a share. See, I had started, scaled, and exited the wrong way. We were number one fastest growing company, and then we became the last place finishers. It was a disaster. And that has always affected me. It's always made me think about cycles. Two lessons from that. One, liquidity or control, and that's in the book. If I'm going to sell my business, I'm either going to have liquidity, which means cash, or I'm going to control the company. And then secondly, bad things do happen. Think of 2022. Anybody here in the audience remember 2022? We had the tech wreck, the crypto crash. We had the hurricane. We had the war in Ukraine. We had it all. And we got hit pretty hard. This company, I'll tell you, this company got hit pretty hard. I have about 20 companies in my incubator, and we were hit with every single one of those. We were hit with the inflation, our paw.com, which brings in 100 containers a year. The container cost went from $2,400 to $24,000 per container, burned about $2 million in profits just that 1 year alone. We got hit with high interest costs. We have a loan, it's an SBA loan, and it went from, it's a $3 million loan on paw.com, and it went from 3%, 3.25%, to over 9% interest rate. We have 800 employees in Ukraine at a different company called Geeks for Less, and the Russians made it 3 miles from our border. And to top it all off, we have a number of homes in one of our real estate businesses called Escape Club. They're luxury real estate rentals, and they're located in North Captiva, and we were hit with an almost Cat 5 storm. So, wow, we were really hit that year. But thankfully, we had enough resources, and we've taken enough money off the table. We've laddered up well so we can handle these shocks. They weren't easy. I had a $5 million loan with a bank, and once the Ukraine war broke out, they backed out of the loan. And it was, it was definitely very frustrating times. Go back to 2000, fast forward 6 years later, we took another company public. My brother and I love technology. We love to build companies. We took it public, and 2 years after that, we sold it to a Fortune 500 company for 17 times EBITDA. And this time, it was all cash. So that is why I was asked to speak at MIT in 2012, because not only that company, but we did a number of other companies. We sold dozens of companies and been very successful. We've done it. We sold Hostopia, that publicly traded company I just mentioned. We sold that one a month before the Lehman crisis. We sold Two Cows. You might remember that one. A few of the audience might remember that one. We sold that one in 98, 99, right before the dot-com crash. We sold the dot club before the tech wreck of 2022. And we continue to exit stage left when things are frothy. When you begin to see the signs that things are frothy, that's when we exit stage left. All right, we have Renee on the stage, and really enjoy having you on, Renee. We'd love to hear from you, your exit story. And if you're in the audience and you want to come on stage and share your exit story, that's what we're talking about today. We're talking about the exit. This is a syndicated podcast, and this is also the topic of an article that we're writing. So if you do come on stage, we ask that you give us permission to print anything that's publicly available. All right, Renee, what are your thoughts on exit?
I went through the same experience as you did, where I got totally creamed in 1989 when my company went public, 22 million in sales, 1982, 83, and then I hired the wrong CEO who destroyed the company. We wrote off 10 million of inventory within 24 months because of him, and then ATI was going to take over my public company. I was going to get 10% of ATI, my shareholders another 5%. And I raised 23 million of the 25 needed for the reverse takeover. And the Royal Bank called the loan because Cooper's Lybrand wanted to make $1.5 million in a receivership. And so they wouldn't give me 2 more weeks for the next 2 million to come in. So they killed what I'd built over 17 years. And so I totally understand the pain, the lessons learned that you described, the difficulty of starting, scaling, and exiting. So I totally relate to everything you said, 100%.
So it sounds like you spent like 17 years building this company, and then it just all fell apart in like what, 17 weeks or 17 days? Like, isn't it
Yeah,
amazing?
yeah. The bank would not give me 2 more weeks to close on ATI taking over my public company. And KY, my friend, ended up selling for $6 billion to AMD. So that would have been a hell of a win for our shareholders. But the bank wouldn't allow it. So I'm totally against bank debt, as you can imagine. I totally don't like certain professional managers because they have their self interest at stake instead of the shareholders. And it's really a difficult journey to build companies.
Yeah, so going back to that billion-dollar collapse, you sound Canadian as well. Our
Oh no,
RBC was
Toronto.
our investment banker. Toronto, yeah, I'm from Toronto as well. You might even remember Two Cows, Internet
Of
Direct,
course,
those
all of
ones.
them, totally.
Yeah, so what a fucking disaster. I mean, $1 billion company. I'm driving through freaking McDonald's and the girl says, I saw you on the news last night. Yeah. Yeah, just get me the coffee. Just get me the coffee, right? No, it was horrible, and I felt guilty about it. I felt horrible about it. I had lost 98% of my wealth at that particular collapse, and I'm curious, like from your perspective, you must have lost a lot as well. And how did you bounce back? Like, how'd you get through the mental challenges of that?
It's called Nightmares and Suicidal. So, 1989, the company goes down, and there's $800,000 owed to creditors of a public company, and my dad says you're going to pay it back. I said, oh. He says, yes. It may not be personal debt, but those people bet on you, they invested on you. You personally are going to pay it back. I spent 10 years paying back $800,000 of funds that I could have, perhaps, it could be argued I did not owe. But my dad was brought up as a gentleman. His word was stronger than his handshake, stronger than a written contract. And that was the world of the 60s and 70s for me, how I grew up. And so I lost 10 years of my life. I was suicidal in 1992. I had this huge thing hanging over my head for those 10 years of paying back 800,000 that I was not legally obligated to do. So it was pure hell.
Yeah, I mean, you're touching a nerve right now. I'll be quite frank, because about 10 days ago, a friend of mine, after 19 years, he was in the business of buying and selling houses, but the market had freezed and he had about 100 employees. And he had to shut his company down. And the following Tuesday, he committed suicide. Yeah, look, I mean, this is the thing. And one of the things he said the day before he died was that his identity, he'd lost his identity. And I appreciate the fact that you did bring that up. Like mental health challenges are a very big thing when it comes to entrepreneurship. We do talk about that in the book. We don't spend a lot on that. We spend mostly in the book Start, Scale, Exit, Repeat. We talk mostly about the code to make money and to succeed. But I do devote the second last chapter to this topic. And there really is a lot of challenges. You do go through a roller coaster when you start and launch a company, and an exit can sometimes be devastating, even if you sell for money. I remember, Michelle, when we signed the contract, and I don't know if you've ever been in a high school play, but you work so hard on it for like 6 months, and then you do the final show, the curtains close, and literally everybody starts crying. It's very sad. So at Dot Club, a very successful sale. All the employees made great money on the sale, but still, we started to tear up when we signed that final contract. Do you remember that moment, Michelle?
Absolutely. I was very upset about it for a very long time. So, yeah, it was hard, very hard. You're working so closely together and you're just building and having a lot of fun doing it. And then all of a sudden it's over. Yeah, it's hard.
Yeah, I think that what we did, my brother and I, in the 2000s was really focus on what we loved the most. And startup failures are the scars of our past that guide us through new ventures. And that's what we got to remember. It's, whether your exit's successful or not successful, we learn from our prior companies. Actually, we have a stat in the book that serial entrepreneurs are um, uh, um, twice as likely to succeed because they've had those scars, they've had those experiences. Brene, keep your story going. I want to hear what happens
Yeah.
after, like, how did you move again? How did you move forward? What happened? You had to pay $800,000 off. What happened next?
Well, 1989, my father said, I'd rather invest in you now than before because you failed, to your point that you just made. Then, when I had a friend who failed a few years ago, so to speak, the company was stolen from him, and he was totally, totally down. I explained to him, you can rebuild 50 times, 100 times faster after you failed because anything you build, you've got so many lessons, so many answers, so many things to do. Sorry. And so the rebuilding process is so accelerated. Um, you've learned so much. So you know who to go to. You can recognize red flags. You know how to solve problems. So the rebuilding process, people don't realize, one, if you have failed, you can rebuild so much better and so much faster. So all I did was build companies, and that's what I still do. I work 17 hours a day, 7 days a week. I don't get paid. My exit is whether I succeed or fail, and I just it keeps you young to build technology companies because you have to keep learning about all new technologies. So I live to stay young and to build companies in new fields. The latest one is cybersecurity, but my point being, by going into fields you know nothing about, you've got such a history that helps, and you're forced to learn and stay young.
Yeah, I like that. That's interesting, and I find it fascinating. I sense that you and I have had very similar paths. I don't take salaries either in any of my companies, which is interesting. That's something that once you get to a certain point of success, you begin to think, forget the salary. Even Elon Musk didn't take a salary at Tesla, but was supposed to walk away with $56 billion on his pay package. But in any case, that's one of the strategies used to attract other people's money, but also why pay the government taxes until your company's profitable? That's been one of my sayings. So we have a section in the book called Exit. Now the book, Start, Scale, Exit, Repeat, is broken into a blue section for start, a red section for scale, an orange section for exit, and repeat is a light blue section. And even if you like, you know, you're beyond the startup phase, although I honestly I really believe you could read this book back to back and get a lot of benefits from it, even if you've already started your company. But I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the exit section of the book. Okay, it begins with a story, and the story, uh, every time I tell this story, 2 years later, somebody will come back to me and say, "I remember when you told me this story." And by the way, the book has that. It's all about stories. Stories about my own stories, but it's also stories of 200 people that we interviewed for the book. So it's about 50 of those actual interviews made the book, and it's really, really interesting to hear all of the stories. Uh, so uh, we had sold our first company. I was 28 years old, just before we sold the other company for stock for stock swap. But we won't go into that one. We sold a company called Two Cows, and we closed. It took about 6 hours to sign the closing documents. We finished about 1 a.m. at the law office downtown Toronto. I received a check for $22 million, and I was holding the money for three of us, so don't get carried away here. And at that time, Renee, we had to pay 37% tax on capital gains. So, in any case, got this check, driving home. We almost get in a car accident. We were like laughing our faces off, saying, "Well, that kind of sucked. You finally make it, and you get killed." But anyway, we managed to get home. I lived in Oakville, and right outside of Toronto. Renee knows where that is. It was a tiny home. I mean, it was a tiny, tiny home. Climbed to the third. It was very skinny and tall. Climbed to the third floor. It was around 2 o'clock in the morning. Walked over to the beds and woke my wife up and handed her a check for the $22 million check. And she wakes up and she looks at it and she goes, "I don't understand." She could not comprehend the zeros that were on the check. It was very, very funny. She looked at because she knew I was working on stuff. I told her I'm working on selling the company. Whatever. She never understood. She never believed. And you go from this point in life where you've got nothing, and all of a sudden, you've got a lot of wealth, and it was just a life changing moment. It was a funny moment in history. And these moments can happen. They can come and they will come if you focus on the basics on starting, scaling, exiting, repeating. Today, we're going to talk about exit. And in the book, we talk about types of buyers. This is an important concept. So earlier, we mentioned that GoDaddy Registry had bought .club. .club was an alternative to .com, .net, .org. By the way, Hostopia was bought by Deluxe Communications, Fortune 500 company. They do all the checks in the United States. And that company had millions of small businesses, and they used our technology to sell to those millions of small businesses. So they looked at the way that they could leverage the company to get their revenue, their earnings up based on their customer base and our technology. And that's what we call a strategic buyer. In the book, we talk about three types of buyers. You have cash flow, which typically is private equity. And private equity will come from a place normally where they want to leverage the company. So let's do maybe a 70. Leverage has come down. The banks have been a little bit more conservative, maybe even 60% right now on the leverage side. But they're going to want to borrow money, and the company's going to need to pay interest payments. So they're really looking for an earnings multiple, that can range anywhere from an e-commerce company right now at about four times earnings to a tech company, which I've done a few deals recently at about 7 times revenue. We tend, especially accretive revenue, accretive monthly or accretive annual models, they tend to do much better. And like I said, at Hostopia, it was 17 times EBITDA. At .club, it was even far higher than that. We're not allowed to disclose the numbers, but you can actually obtain a pretty significant multiple with certain types of companies. But again, that's with strategic buyers. Cash flow buyers looking at, okay, what's the cash flow? How much can I borrow against that? What can I get? So you're typically looking at a pretty low multiple. Then you've got a competitor buyout. A competitor buyout is going to come in and eliminate costs, and they're going to give you somewhere between where they're at, where your company's actually worth on the street versus the value of merging the two companies together. And then you've got the strategic buyer, and that buyer is looking at leveraging from their existing customer base. Renee, it sounds like you've had a lot of experience selling companies. You're my guest today, and I really wanted to hear more from you as well. What are some of your tips to sell successfully, if you're able to answer that?
I think you said it yourself. Um, I'm still struggling with the topic of selling, meaning I'm not money oriented. Now I am in the cybersecurity company. I'm always technology and R&D oriented. I'm after innovations that have impact on as many people as possible. I'm after solving the toughest problems in the world from from an R&D point of view. So I'm not your normal business person in any way, but I'm having to be that for the cybersecurity company because at this stage I do have to do both. Um, Not just be obsessed with development, first in the world, R&D, and tech. And so right now I am focused on both. So I'll tell you in 2 years from now.
Exactly. And by the way, I'm involved in a cybersecurity company too. I think that I don't know what you do with your cybersecurity company, but we do DNS domain name security, and we're the first company in the world to do to have the technology that goes in and analyzes everyone's domain names and looks for security flaws. But we've been partnering with cybersecurity companies, so I don't know if there's anything there, but would
Yeah,
love to talk.
yeah, I'll email you. And
Yeah,
so
yeah, absolutely, and I'll connect you to the president. And yeah, look, I mean, there is a lot of things to think about when you do sell your company. And one of the chapters I have in the book is called "Timing is Half the Value." And I think you sort of got a sense of that if you're here earlier when I talked about um, the sales in the 90s and the 2000s and 2020s and whatnot of the company, some of the companies I was involved with selling before the Lehman crisis and whatnot. But we want to look for signs of froth in the marketplace. And what do I mean by froth? Think about 2021. Just go back. It wasn't that far ago when you could buy a Bored Ape, a cartoon picture, digitally for $500,000. We saw a stock called GameStop rise to astronomical levels. Um, we saw something called SPACs, special purpose acquisition companies. I personally love them because I thought this was a way for entrepreneurs to get to the market and get liquidity. But you know what? We saw them take off, and there were dozens of them or hundreds of them launching, and they were all so successful. So when we begin to see times of froth, that's when I say exit stage left. And when you do that, you'd be surprised. The valuation of e-commerce companies, we're looking at that because we have a number of e-commerce companies in our incubator here. One of them being paw.com, paw.com, another Meowingtons that Michelle owns, which is a cat company, cats and dogs running around the office here. And with those companies, we saw valuations collapse about 95%. Look at BarkBox, 3.6 billion to 140 million. Look at Allbirds, the way it collapsed, and Casper, and some of these other e-commerce brands. Don't get me wrong, I actually think they're good businesses in a lot of ways, but we saw the valuations absolutely get decimated. When I say timing is 50% of the value, in the case of e-commerce companies, it was probably more along the lines of 80 to 90% of the value. What's interesting about this podcast, our very first show, and this is show number 144, I believe. I might be one off. Sorry, Mimi. But I believe we're 144. And if you go back to the very first episode, we interviewed Joseph Martin. Joseph Martin started a company called BoxyCharm, and he sold it for $500 million. And this was only, what, 2 years ago? A little over 2 years ago when the market was that frothy. So timing is half the value on exit. Michelle, any thoughts about timing or exits that you might want to add to this conversation?
Yeah, I mean, timing's absolutely critical. Look, the e-commerce market pretty much went down the tubes after COVID, and we're seeing that results of that, like you said. So now a lot of e-commerce shops that thought they were going to sell for a lot of money are kind of having to wait it out and, relook at their strategy and get competitive again. For us at Club, actually, I think we were pretty fortunate because the company was doing extremely well progressively without a dip, quite honestly, and did even better during COVID. Um, Obviously, we don't own it now, but we actually sold, we believe, at the right time. There's a lot of pressure right now in the market with interest rates high and all the other dynamics that are happening. But I think that's part of what Colin's whole philosophy is around start, scale, exit, repeat is, if you just keep pushing and pushing, thinking you're going to make more and more or sell for more and more, that's not always the case because these things happen, wars happen, interest rates happen, and you don't get to choose. So I think part of the, lesson here is, there's a time and a place to take money off the table. And don't be afraid or think, oh my gosh, I could have made much more, because quite oftentimes that's not how it goes.
Can I add to that, Michelle? 1983, a year before that, I raised 2.5 million on private placement, 5 pension funds. 1983, I was going to go. I went public in March. There were 19 companies lined up after me, and I was arrogant enough to think in March that, gee, the brokers want to change the price of the stock from $9 to $7 that they promised me on 13 million on a 30 million valuation, and I arrogantly hesitated. My dad says to the brokers, 8 brokers, let me talk to my son. I'm 35 years old. He says, you're going to accept their deal. I've never told you what to do in your life, but you're going to accept it. We have 6 million in debt. This will give us 7 million in cash. I went in, accepted the deal, said thank you. 2 weeks later, the market crashed. 19 companies lined up after me. None could go public for the next 2 years. Half of them, 80% died. So to what you're saying is, you never know what can happen. If you're arrogant like I was really stupid in my arrogance. You don't have the experience to know how to say thank you to capital. You think you're a big shot. You think you can, you're going to succeed. Nothing's going to stop you. Life happens, and everything you said is so accurate. Thanks.
Isn't it so? I mean, we always look back. Okay, let's talk about PAW for a second. That's paw.com. And we did $39 million in sales during the pandemic in that year, about 3.5 million in profit. We were 3 years in a row fastest growing company on the Inc. 5,000, one of the fastest growing companies. And we had multiple buyers lined up to buy us. But we said, oh, wait a minute, if we did 39 million this year, we're going to do 50, 60 million next year. Why would we sell today? Well, you know what? The pandemic ended. There was a little bit of a pandemic hangover. The revenue pulled back a bit. And the valuations that we were talking about, and you see them in publicly traded multiples, they absolutely collapsed. And so, here was a guy who's been writing this book for 10 years who didn't take his own advice and sort of like, guys, we need to sell and we need to do it this year no matter what. It's okay to take some money off the table. It's okay to let other people make money, by the way. Two Cows, one of our first companies, went to over $500 million in valuation, and we sold it for far less than that. So it really is okay. I'd like to also, on exit, talk about the things that you need to think about as an entrepreneur. So often a lot of entrepreneurs try to sell their company and they position themselves as the hero. And I'm going to make the case right now that that's a mistake. That's a huge mistake. See, I had bought, after I had sold in 1999 to Internet Direct and in 2006 to Deluxe, I was in charge of the acquisitions for those companies. So we were buying our competitors up in both scenarios. And I bought about 25 companies. And I will say this, that 99%, maybe 100%, because I can't even think of the 1% of the entrepreneurs did not stay with the company more than 24 months later. See, I had actually agreed to stay with the company for 3 years after I sold to Deluxe, and I followed through that commitment. And the day that commitment came up, I didn't care how much I was making. I had to get the hell out of there. Working for corporate America, I really hated it. Most entrepreneurs do that, do hate it as well. And so this is something to consider. They're not stupid. The buyers are not stupid. They know that they need this company to run post you. And so the more you can play yourself down, the more you can check your ego at the door, the more you can elevate the people around you, the better the valuation of your company. So that's something to consider as well, is really positioning yourself, getting it ready for that sale. And the other thing to get it ready for sale is to think about, okay, in 12 months from now or 24 months from now, I'm going to need to figure out, I'm going to need to maximize the value on exit. And so what I want to do 12 to 24 months before that is figure out what are the KPIs, what are the metrics in the industry that they're watching. Back in 2022, for e-commerce companies, believe it or not, really 2021, they were looking at the revenue. There was a company called MVMT, sold for 1 times revenue, about $100 million. It's a watch company. So revenue mattered, growth mattered. Come 2023, nobody gave a damn about growth anymore. All they cared about was earnings. Earnings matter. So that was the key metric. So sometimes these metrics can change in your industry, but you want to think about what is that metric and how do we maximize that metric in the short term in order to boost our valuation on sale. There's a funny story going back to .club, Michelle, about Clubhouse and .club. So when Clubhouse first launched, a lot of, for whatever reason, a lot of club owners, a lot of uh, Clubhouse influencers, whatever you want to call them, they started buying up .club domains, and it turned into a frenzy. It was somewhat almost like the Bored Ape frenzy. It was a bit crazy. Like one day, we come to the office, we get a phone call. Hey, do you hear about all these people buying .club names? We're looking at the numbers and we're saying, holy shit, they're exploding. Just one day, I think we sold 350 premium names, and premium names were names that were sold for like $1,000 each or something crazy. It was just absolutely insane, the number of domain names that we were selling at a premium level. People were buying their first name .clubs, whatever .club. It was really, really crazy, and it was really interesting. So sometimes these positive events can happen that can give you the momentum. Had at that point, Michelle, we say, you know what? Why don't we see how this plays out? See, we had actually received an offer from GoDaddy and had accepted the offer. Now, I'm not allowed to talk too much about it, um, but the fact is, we had a material upside event, which is very rare. It's usually a material downside event. You ever sold your company? They're always looking to knock your price down. We had a material upside event, and because of that, we had to have a revaluation in the mid process, and they agreed to it. But we could have also sat back and said, look, you know what? Things are going good. We're doing so well. It's going to keep going. But we knew things were good. It went frothy, and we were able to sell them, and we were able to exit. So, in any case, when you're selling your company, you're going to want to think about how you sell your company and who you sell it to. We talked about the different types of buyers. Sometimes you'll have a company that, it's just not doing that well. But instead of walking away, I would highly encourage you to find a way to monetize on exit. So we had a company up in Canada, still own a portion of that company, but it was an outdoor media company. We did all the taxi tops in the Toronto market. Another Toronto story, Renee. Too many Toronto stories. You should pick up the book. There's a lot of Canadian stories in there. So we actually owned we still own all the taxi tops in Toronto, and but we'd run this company. We got a monopoly, which was really cool because took us years to fight for that. But then something called Uber came out and started whacking the business. We were getting killed, and then the pandemic pretty much put it onto the ground. I mean, it pretty much was done. But we were able to say, okay, we don't want to keep running this anymore. We want to walk away from it. Why don't we sell this to our competitor? And we sold it to him for $0. We said, we want you to take the company. Here it is. And we got to know him over a couple of years. And this is instead of walking away. I'm talking about when things are down, you don't want to go, like you don't want to just walk away from that money. Okay. We put $1.5 million into this company. All right. So we decided to talk to our competitor, and we said, let's do a deal. You're going to pay us a royalty on every sign for the next 6 years. And we did the deal. We've captured back about 70% of our initial capital back on it. Ironically, the business has actually turned up recently because we now have digital signs in Toronto, and we get a high revenue stream from the digital sign, so we get a percentage of that in our royalty. And then we also got 15% of the combined company as well. So even though we were down and out on this company, in the end, we still might make a decent profit. I think we've only had about 70, maybe 80% of our money paid back on the initial investment, but we're heading down the right path. It's better to monetize on exit versus just walk away from that exit. All right, we have a few minutes left here. If you're in the audience, feel free to raise your hand and come and share with us your exit story. What is it that you did when you exited your company? Was it successful? Was it a failure? How did it turn out? We want to hear from you. We love the stories like Renee shared with us, and we really appreciate that. I should also mention this is also the a podcast which we syndicate called Start, Scale, Exit, Repeat: Serial Entrepreneur Secrets Revealed. Happens to be this same name as the book, which, by the way, Michelle, this morning I woke up, I checked the Amazon, and we were #1 for entrepreneurship management this morning on that book. So we were very excited about that. We launched it October 3rd after 10 years of writing, 2 years with 6 full-time staff members, interviewing 200 people, of which 50 made the book. So if you're in the audience and you want to jump on stage, please raise your hand. We have a few minutes left. Before we jump over to Entree, today we're doing a masterclass, which is slightly different topic than the one we're talking about now. I charge $20,000 when I travel to do speeches. And this is the speech that I deliver, and it's been considered the highest rated speech that I've ever done on any of the places I've gone. And it's called Start, Scale, Exit, Take Some Money Off the Table, Repeat. And we have a PowerPoint presentation. It is an absolutely free masterclass, which we will be doing live at 3 o'clock on Entree. Mimi, if you could post that link for Entree, that would be great as well. I'm keeping Mimi busy here. But no, but it's actually it's a really interesting take on and Michelle has touched upon it, this concept of laddering up your wealth, this idea that you know that you need to find a way to and Renee, it seems like you've done this, but entrepreneurship is a trade, and we need to learn how to master that trade. It's a trade like any other trade. And that's what we're going to be talking about today on Entree, Start, Scale, Exit, Take Some Money Off the Table, Repeat. The only way to access this content post the 3 o'clock, the live session today, will be to see it on the learning section of Entree, which is a pro membership. I think it's about $300 a year to be able to access it and get access to that content. So if you're interested in really getting deep into laddering up your wealth, then that would be a session to attend. And if you're listening to this in podcast, you can go to Entree, sign up to the pro membership, and listen to those masterclasses. We've done 4 already, and we're going to add 1 per month on the Entree platform. Okay, are we good? Michelle, Renee, any other? I think we sort of covered like
Yeah, let's,
all the
yes,
topics, right?
I think so, but maybe, just for people here in the audience, like the entree, you're going to do like a full on presentation and go more in depth, right? Tell me a little more.
Oh yeah, for the presentation, it's a PowerPoint presentation. And these are not the PowerPoints with lots of words on the screen. It's really basically images, which talk about the concept of exit and also repeat, and that your identity is not based on just your one company and who you are in that industry. That you are a tradesperson. That your skill is entrepreneurship, and we again we need to learn how to master that trade. And it is a trade, and you can learn it, and you can learn how to repeat it. And there's some pretty neat techniques we talk about in repeat. Um, it's really interesting that Renee had some similar thoughts around. He doesn't take a salary; he just takes the capital gains. It's those kind of uh, tricks and tips that we give on repeat. and we'll get into it in a lot more detail. Well, you've been listening to Start, Scale, Exit, Repeat, Serial Entrepreneur Secrets Revealed, and this is a syndicated podcast. We're going to jump over in a few minutes. If there are any more questions, any more thoughts on the panel here, otherwise we'll close the room. But really enjoyed the session, and really, Renee, really appreciate you coming on stage. I mean, especially sharing those challenges from the 80s and the 1984, and really, it sounded like
He's
you knew
done it
what you're
all.
doing.
I think he has. And I remember your stories from before as well, Renee. So thank you for, I think we all just need to help each other in the end.
And that's Renee Pardo, Renepardo, if we quote you in the article, right? So, yeah, I can see that from the clubhouse.
All right. Well, I
Well, all
think
right,
we should head on over to Entree,
I will set
ENTRE.
up the computer. I'll set it up now, and we'll be talking about it.
All right, everyone. Looking
We'll
forward
see
to
you next
seeing
week.
you. Okay. Bye.